Hey, how's it going, everybody? You're listening to a special video episode of the Super Marcato Brothers Video Game Music Podcast.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is a podcast where we share and discuss the very best in video game music. My name is Karl Will.
And I'm his brother, Will Brueggemann. You know, even though we're living in different cities and we're apart, we thought it still might be fun to do another video episode, even though we're recording remotely.
Just
because
for
this is just going to be a really fun topic.
You know, it's like 432 or whatever, however many episodes we've done on this podcast. And this is the first time we're doing, I would consider, a regular, good old-fashioned episode as a video. Usually we only dedicate the video episodes to the centennial, the 100, 200, 300. So I thought it would just be fun if we did a classic topic. This is shoot 'em ups today, which is sure to be a really fun playlist and episode. So yeah, let's throw the videos on. Once in a while, it'd be fun to do this. So how's everybody doing out there? Will, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good.
Sounds like it.
This is our, I think, second or third week here in Chicago.
Yeah.
And Emma and I are just loving it here. We really feel comfortable in our place, and we really like our neighborhood. And I'm just kind of, antsy. I'm waiting for my classes to start up, and I'm starting to feel a little bit kind of like I need something to do.
Do you have the cabin fever setting in?
I'm glad we have this podcast today. I wouldn't say cabin fever because we do go out pretty much every day and we walk around, and this is a beautiful area. It's more just that I don't really have any projects to work on. I don't have anything I'm required to do. I'm not really working during this month. So hey, let's record a podcast episode.
Yeah. Well, guys, today's topic is shoot 'em ups. And that is such an amazing topic when you think about the music. It's kind of a broad genre within, I would say, action games. But what's so funny is even within shoot 'em ups, I would say there's like many sub-genres within that. We'll touch on a couple of them today. One thing I did want to mention, there's so many great games and scores we couldn't feature today. I tried to actually make it so that only one track per game would be allowed. And actually, now that I'm looking at the playlist, it's one track per series, which is pretty insane. So yeah, there's a lot of great stuff that couldn't make this episode. One thing I wanted to give a shout out, recently we had an episode on that Cute 'em Up series, Twinbee. That is a subgenre of a shoot 'em up. We thought since we had that whole episode, there's no Twinbee today. There is something representative, a different series of the cute 'em up subgenre. So we'll touch a little bit on that today. But I think everybody knows what a shoot 'em up is. Basically, it's when the primary aspect of the game is shooting things. You're being shot at like crazy. You have to shoot all kind of things around you. Many times the screen is scrolling either horizontally or vertically.
Yeah, and I'd say for the most part, it seems that every single game on this list is it's like a flying form of shoot 'em up, or a game where rather than something like Contra, which is like a side scroller shooter, is probably how you consider that, or like Metal Slug would fall into that category.
It's a good point. We did not include any on foot games.
Most of these are space shooters, and whether they take place in space, like something like R-Type, or whether they're more like flying in a jet plane like Salamander.
We have a lot today, and oh my God, we have some amazing music to get to. Some absolute classics that we've loved for years, some new stuff we've never played before. Let's dive in, shall we, Will?
Let's do it.
Okay, what you guys heard playing in was Sky High. That's from a game I had not been familiar with at all. It's called Ibarra, and that was composed by a person I am familiar with, Shinji Hosoe. That came out for the PS2, started things off with a really rocking energy. Let's go into the next track. This is a classic for the podcast. We've loved this for years. A great kind of jazz, funk fusion, really laid-back, groovy score, actually, to this game. It's Galaxy Force 2, and this particular track, called Alone Fighter, was composed by Katsuhiro Hayashi. Let's take a listen. Just a taste, guys. That is Alone Fighter. That's a classic from Galaxy Force 2.
That's how we like our FM music, right?
That's how we like to start our episodes. That is original arcade soundtrack there. This particular piece was by Katsuhiro Hayashi, a classic Sega composer. I will say a very different vibe and style and tempo when we think of shoot 'em up music, but I love this track. It grooves.
Yeah, I have 4 things to say about this piece of music.
8 things to say.
And that
Part
is
1A.
that it's jazzy, it's funky, it's fusiony, and it's fun. In that order.
Yeah, I like that. I would agree with that. It's so much
Carl,
fun.
Can you put
one
up little
thing,
graphics when I say each of those
sure.
words?
You got it, man. Just because you asked nicely.
Kidding.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this music for shoot 'em up games, there's such a strong tradition. It really rivals any other genre of video games as far as a clear and strong tradition. All the music today is very fun, very exciting. Even if it's a little more laid back, like something like this, Galaxy Force 2, it's still very energetic. I mean, busy bass writing, very limber and active. It's still a very busy piece of music, even if I would consider the overall style to be a little more chilled out than what we're going to hear a lot today.
Well, I also love some of the density of the chords. A lot of these chords are diatonic, but yet they're fully fleshed out, often with sevenths and ninths and sixths.
Just a little bit of that jazziness,
really,
man.
Yeah, it's really rich, but it has this sort of somber, melancholy quality to it as well that I'm really fond of. And yeah, I agree, Carl. This isn't sort of the status quo for shoot 'em ups or space shooter games.
I agree.
But it's a particularly lovely sound, and I think it definitely would fit well with that kind of gameplay, particularly when you think about the rate of speed for the scrolling screen is often a little bit gradual, and the frenetic energy comes from the amount of enemies often on the screen and just how fast you have to be moving from projectiles. But most shoot 'em up games, the screen tends to scroll very slowly. And so I do think that when you're finding the tempo for a piece of music, particularly in media, when it's meant to accompany something, that's one of the most important elements to make something feel right, is that it has to, whether it's a groove-based piece or any kind of composition, the tempo has to be in sync with the gameplay.
Well, I haven't played Galaxy Force 2, but from what I've seen, I think the tempo of this piece matches the game perfectly. And there is a little bit of that kind of slight sadness that you get in a lot of Hayashi music. And so, what a great composer. Let's move on. Now, this is a video episode, which means we're not really doing any editing. So if I make some flubs, it's just going to be in the episode. We'll do it live. So here we go. The first flub of the day, most likely. Will, you're going to have to help me out with this. This is a game called DoDonPachi. I got that part right. Sai Dai Ojo is maybe the best I could do. That's the name of the game. I think that was correct. Thank you. And the track we're going to play is Ron Stage 1. This is a series, and I believe, if memory serves, I'm not an expert on some of these games, but this is developed by Cave, which is a legendary company that almost exclusively makes shoot 'em ups. They're really known for shoot 'em ups. Now, this is a sub-genre of shoot 'em ups called bullet hell. And so we wanted to have some representation of that today. So let's take a listen to Ron Stage 1, composed by the very prolific shoot 'em up composer, Manabu Namiki. Just going to give you guys a taste today of this music in order to have time for everything. And if you like this stuff, go and check it out on your own. This is Ron Stage 1 from, here we go, DoDonPachi Sai Dai Aojao. And this is composed by Manabu Namiki, a name that we're going to get a few times on this episode, including the playout. So if you like this kind of music, stick around for the playout. This is another arcade soundtrack.
I love this. The fact that this isn't track of the week says something about the quality of today's episode.
We did not mess around.
Such an innovative piece of music. What I love about it is that, to me, it does feel so video gamey. Just the construction of this kind of pop melody and how it bursts into that chorus. Yeah, right before we were fading down there. It's really catchy, but the overall production has this kind of club rave quality to it.
I
with
love that
a tremendous amount of sidechain compression and that 4-on-the-floor kick drum.
Club music was, or like typical outside of video game music dance music was like, I would be at the rave. I mean, this is just everything I would ever want. Yes, the dance
I think
beat
you just
is there.
need to go to Japan.
Maybe. I mean, just the mix of jazz and fusion and funk and dance and just video game music
also,
all coming together is beautiful.
What I love about the form of this particular track is it sort of starts off a little bit more harmonically ambiguous.
Yeah.
Even when
Very
the
bold.
groove kind of comes in and everything, it's still, there's a lot of surprising chords, and there's a particular moment that I loved where it resolved to the surprising major 7th chord, and it was really delicious and sweet, but then the melody was hitting this cross relation where it was almost hitting the minor third against the major third of that major 7 chord, and it was cool. It was this particular style that it didn't quite feel bluesy, and it didn't quite feel like a pastiche, but it was just constantly keeping you on your toes, and it added a slight element of emotional complexity to a piece of music that's just really satisfying and pure. And then I was already so just enjoying the way it was going. And then it breaks into this incredibly catchy chorus. And then there's like this surprising modulation in the middle of the chorus.
It's honestly,
really advanced.
It's the perfect representation of bullet hell. I mean, playing a bullet hell shoot 'em up, it's just endless bullets, endless lasers, a barrage at you the entire time you're playing. And that's kind of what this music is in a good way. And I know Carlos, shout out, what's up, Carlos? He's a big fan of Namiki. So we'll go back to this great composer. Let's now move on to a classic. We're going to go continue our arcade block, but going from a slightly more modern game to one of the earliest arcade shoot 'em ups, really. This is Salamander. Composed by Miki Higashino and Yoshiaki Hatano. Let's take a listen to Fly High. Short and sweet. That's all we got. About 34 seconds of a loop there. This is Fly High from Salamander for the arcade, composed by Higashino and Hatano. And this would go on to start basically the Gradius series, right, Will? Mm-hmm. It's kind of considered maybe the first game in that series. Wonderful music, very optimistic and bright. And this is a type of subgenre of shoot 'em ups that Will was very influenced and inspired by when he created, what's that album called? It's very similar to a game. I don't want to get it wrong.
Squadron.
The only reason
Squadron.
I don't want to get it wrong because we have a game on the episode today, Superstar Soldier, and it was such a mind block when you released that. I got them mixed up, and I always called it the wrong thing.
That's funny.
But yeah, Salamander was one of the biggest influences for you, right?
Yeah, and Salamander, the game on the NES in North America, is known as Life Force. So we may have called it that at some point in the podcast too. But what I so love about this score, there's so many things. First of all, I love how it seems to capture the joy of flight. We've talked about this before, but a lot of the melodic intervals have some sort of ascending leap, a lot of open intervals in the melody, which create this sort of confidence. I mean, even if you think about like John Williams' Superman theme, there's a lot of open fifths in that melody, which communicates kind of the strength of Superman. But I also think the element of flight has something to do with that ascending nature. But then the other thing that I love about just again, the charm and simplicity of this old arcade track in the way that a piece of music like this is presented. It's doing two things simultaneously. That sort of triplet backbeat puts it in the genre of like a march, kind of like something like Superman, you know, dun, 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 dun. It feels
exciting
heroic,
and rousing.
Yet by having these, I guess you could call them drums, the kind of noise channel percussion that we're hearing here, also puts it in the genre of like a rock shuffle, in more of like a 6/8 feeling rather than those being
it feels
triplets.
so comfortable.
Either way, that triplet figuration almost puts in mind the idea of like a propeller or a wind turbine, something that would help create the soaring feeling of flying. But it's that great thing that video game music can do, where in some ways it feels hundreds of years old, in some ways it maybe feels a few decades old, and in other ways
timeless.
It's brand new.
Such a great score. Glad we were able to feature something very classic from the early days of shoot 'em ups. Now let's go to something a little more modern. This is from our boy Yosuke Yasui, one of the strongest shoot 'em up composers, I will say, even though the games he worked on maybe aren't quite as well known. This is a game called Eschatos. We're going to play a track called Rush Into. This game came out for the PC and the Xbox 360. Let's take a listen. That's your little taste of Rush Into from Eschatos. Came out for the PC and the Xbox 360. When doing a lot of research and listening this past week, a lot of fantastic Xbox 360 shoot 'em ups, at least score-wise. I mean, I can't speak to the quality of the games, but some fantastic scores for that system. This is, of course, by Yasui, who we had a really delightful interview episode with. We were able to interview him via emails and then had a translator kind of take them. And that was a really fascinating interview. Such a humble guy. I'm yearning for a lot more of his music. I don't know what he's been up to as of late, but there's no one else like him. Just so joyous.
Yeah, so fantastic. And you can tell that he's had influence from people like Katsuhiro Hayashi or Hitoshi Sakamoto.
Absolutely.
Again, this is another example of a rock shuffle. And in many ways, this feels like a love letter to some of the tracks that we've already heard so far today and some of the ones that will have yet to come. But he has such a rich sense of groove, production, in harmony. I mean, one of the opening gestures of this piece is that really beautiful kind of extended dominant chord with the sharp
the chord
9.
master.
It's that same cross relation.
He's one of my favorite video game composers when it comes to injecting surprising chords that feel oddly natural. Almost every time you hear a surprising chord from Yasui, it's always this reaction from me. Oh, that was cool.
They're all out of the handbook of video game harmony. Every one of his gestures, for as delicious as they are, you can find a myriad of examples of other composers in games doing similar things, which is why his music feels bold, confident, but also familiar. And it isn't just the fact that, you know, he likes to fuse retro chip sounds in with a lot of his music. There is that on a compositional quality, melodically, and particularly harmonically, it's very much a love letter to many of kind of his Japanese composition elders that we're going to hear on today's playlist.
Absolutely a love letter, and we love him so very much. We may go back to Yasui-san later in the episode. That's cool. Actually, we will a couple times. Spoiler alert. Okay, let's move on to a classic, considered, at least score-wise, one of the best shoot-'em-up games. This came out for the Saturn. This is Radiant Silvergun by the very beloved and highly esteemed composer Hitoshi Sakimoto. Let's take a listen to a piece called Reminiscence. And there you go. That was a little bit of Reminiscence from Radiant Silvergun. Man, this MIDI orchestra is fired up. The MIDI conductor is really letting them have it here. This is so exciting. This is composed by Hitoshi
I don't know why, but I picture,
Sakimoto.
When you said MIDI conductor, I pictured the little paper clip from the old Microsoft
adorable.
Word, like I help you find
guy.
clip art.
Yeah, this is not the sound that we expect from a shoot-'em-up game. I can't think of really any other shoot-'em-up game that went for this. I know that there, Radiant Silvergun, there was a game that was kind of a sequel to that, and I did listen to it. I don't recall it sounding quite like this. I don't know if it was Sakimoto, but man, what a unique voice this gentleman is. This is outstanding orchestral music.
Yeah,
it happens to be for a shoot-'em-up.
Yeah, he clearly, he always seems to want to inject a very cinematic quality to his music. And
it's almost like he can't help himself.
Yeah, so often it's orchestral, but I imagine those are the composers that influence him. Yet he is a very versatile. I mean, I remember doing the episode on him. He's a versatile guy. He's written in lots of different styles. I think it's so notable, his contributions, particularly the chip music contributions that accurately conjure up that orchestral sound. It's just so impressive because there are very few composers who write in that style on any kind of FM hardware. I mean, there's just a number that you could count on one hand.
I mean, I know that I might be a little biased, but I am a sucker for early Sakimoto era music. When he was working with those chips, it's such an exciting voice coming, just kind of blowing past the limitations and just so much energy inside that little chip. That's the weird thing about video
game music. I mean, when we think of some of the gods of game music in the early days that were pioneering things with the technology that no one else was doing. I mean, you think of someone like Tim Follin or anybody in kind of the demo scene, people that were really focused on getting kind of as much juice as possible out of these primitive sounds. It's like once the technology improves, you almost need a different kind of composer and a different kind of musical skill that becomes valuable.
I remember Matt Furness.
But something's lost because there's the imagination that
and the challenge
one has to conjure up. Yeah, it comes from the challenge. It comes from the limitation. We've talked about this before, but I mean, I think Sakimoto is a perfect example of someone like that, where his early music, it's not that it's any better compositionally, but there's something novel and innovative about just having the gall to write a piece of music like that with these certain types of limitations. It's just really impressive.
Well, we've already heard contributions from Konami, and we're going to hear another one. I will be honest, one of the first things I thought of when we had this Shoot 'em Ups episode on the docket was Axelay for the Super Nintendo. Really interesting and unique score. Let's take a listen to a piece called Unkai, and this is composed by Taro Kudo. God, that is good. You guys are listening to Unkai. What an exciting piece of music. This is why we love shoot 'em ups. This is from Axelay for the Super Nintendo, composed by Taro Kudo. And I never realized this before, but I will say, listening to this, at least today, this really reminded me of your music, Will. There were so many little moments. Overall, I think you've gone for this kind of rousing, exciting VGM style a lot. But there are these little moments, whether it was with the organ suspensions and the twinkles and the arpeggios, I could just kind of hear you coming up with something like this. This is a really fun piece.
Well, I take that as a compliment because I really like this piece of music. There's a lot of interesting things, though, as you mentioned. Little harmonic gestures, little moments that are odd and surprising. Yeah. I think it's one of the things that I think so often goes unappreciated about old school video game music, which is the fact that while it is made to be easy to listen, it is not lazy or phoned in. Obviously, I'm not speaking in the case of every single video game music composer, but so much video game music, one of the things that makes it interesting to talk about are these little moments of surprise. It's kind of like talking about American popular music that started cropping up in the 60s and 70s, where you started having some of these untrained musicians with real talent in imagination starting to do things that, the adult generation at the time would dismiss because of the volume or the subject matter of the lyrics. Yet something that somebody like Leonard Bernstein did so great was to use his, sophisticated, educated musical vocabulary to try to explain to that generation why this music being made today was so remarkable, because there was so much innovation happening. And I feel that way about particularly this era of video game music, which is there was so much harmonic excitement and innovation and
fusion
arrangement
and ingenuity.
Groove. Yeah, fusion
picking
is the
and choosing
word.
From so many different traditions. Oh, it's just delightful. And it works it also works in the tradition of shoot 'em up games, like it does remind you a little bit of the Gradius series, but I feel like Kudo is injecting some of his own ideas and taking from places that maybe we haven't quite heard in a shoot 'em up score yet.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and when you talk about fusion, it isn't just the genre of like jazz fusion or rock fusion. It's literally the definition of what fusion means. It's the combination of various sources, and in this case they would be musical styles and influences, and some of that is conscious and some of that is unconscious, and it's the result of, I think, a really exciting thing happened with the birth of the video game industry, which is that it was one of the first times in America where you had a big proportion of our popular culture being innovated by and created in Japan.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really exciting thing because you had this beautiful sort of East meets West. You have kind of in the way that America and American sensibilities influenced Japanese game makers and Japanese composers, yet those video games and that music and those composers then would influence people not just in America but all over the world. And there's this really cool thing that happened that almost, it's like if you blink you could miss it because people were so focused on the economic value of the video game industry, and they're focused on the technology and what it means for the future. But this really beautiful novel form of new musical art emerged.
It's one of the things that we were so excited to celebrate when we started the podcast, and it still excites us every single week. So there you go, guys. That is a little taste of Axelay. If you, for some reason, you haven't heard that score, look into it because it's quite unique, actually. Let's move on to a classic. We're going to go from the Super Nintendo to the arcade here with the original version of Area 88, also known as UN Squadron. This is kind of a different subset of shoot 'em ups. I would say more of a militaristic theme. You're not in space, you're in the sky. I would imagine that the pace is slightly slower than some of these crazy space shooter games. And this is also a horizontally scrolling game instead of vertical, I believe. So this is composed by Minami Matsumai. Let's take a listen to a classic, Round 8, Marine. Whew, man, this track keeps going and going, giving you the goods. Surprisingly emotional here. This is round 8, Marine from Area 88, composed by Manami Matsumae. This is the arcade version here. This, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the tracks that is not in the Super Nintendo version. There's actually a handful of pieces that, for whatever reason, they maybe shortened the game for the Super Nintendo release, or I think they maybe changed some of the stages. But yeah, this is such a great piece of music. I love the melody. Very Matsumae-esque.
It's one of her great melodies. It's so strong, and it's so Capcom-y. I mean, this would be at home in like an SNES Mega Man X kind of title. I definitely hear a lot of influence to Yoko Shimomura. This also sounds like something from Street Fighter 2.
Well, I don't know if you'd agree with me, but there's always something I've been so mesmerized by this melody. It's almost like a really interesting look at having different, like really high contrast from long, sustained notes, very few notes per measure, to the most fast-paced, soloistic flourish of notes you could imagine. And she makes all of it feel very natural. I mean, there's times in this melody when it feels like she's taking a full-blown solo, but it still feels like oddly catchy and natural. And
that's really one of her strengths. I think it's because she composes very diligently. And she's very, I think, precious about those few notes being really classic and memorable and iconic pillars of notes.
She starts the melody out that way. But she doesn't
then it can
stick
complicate
with that idea.
itself because of the arrangement. She wants to make it authentically in a style, but that's why her music tends to be layered with nuanced emotion, because that opening melodic phrase is painful and a little bit melancholy and sad, yet it fits in this groove so well. One of my favorite moments is that
and that also starts to get more complex.
It's a very Matsumae-esque B section. You know, when we interviewed her several years ago, I was curious about that, in particular those sort of jazzy B sections that modulate through a series of kind of jazzy chord changes.
A lot of
and she talked about some of her influence, and it's interesting. She credited that type of gesture to Pat Metheny and really being interested in the music of Pat Metheny, which is kind of funny. It's funny because that wouldn't have been my first thought, yet it really does make a lot of sense. And that also gets to that thing we were talking about East meets West, that we weren't always necessarily aware of the aspects of our culture that were influencing so many of these Japanese composers, but they also were not necessarily aware of the kind of impact and influence they've had on an entire generation of American musicians. So I love that kind of stuff where people creating something in earnest aren't always aware of exactly the kind of good effects that can come out of their honest work.
That is so true. Well, now let's move on to, and I'm not going to get this wrong, Superstar Soldier, not Squadron. This is a classic shoot-'em-up score for the TurboGrafx 16, featured on our TurboGrafx episode way back in Season 1. This is Stage 1, and it's composed by Nozomi Nakahashi and Kaita Hoshi. One question, Will. Was this score at all influential for you, or was it just something about that title that you really liked?
I wouldn't say this score in particular was necessarily influential, but space shooters, shoot-'em-ups in general were the kind of style that Carlos and I wanted to emulate for that.
And it's so fun to have the
project.
alliteration, you know?
Yeah, and then the name was definitely a winking tribute to Superstar Soldier, because I wanted something that had that kind of classic but fun. It's like accessible. There's a sort of military thing. And then there's the old Japanese kind of everything is super this, super that. That kind
it's
of,
very video gamey.
Put it in the 80s, 90s to me.
Well, let's take a listen to Stage 1 from Superstar Soldier. Well, this is a classic. This is stage 1 from Superstar Soldier for the TurboGrafx-16, composed by Nozomi Nakahashi and Kaita Hoshi. And this one has a lot of elements of classic video game music that we've touched on before and we've given names for. There was a time when I called that rhythm the ease bass rhythm. It's that classic rocking gallop, sometime in octave, sometimes not. It's featured in this track. The chord progression is very classic and traditional. It's a very textbook piece of video game music. They weren't breaking the mold. They weren't reinventing the wheel with this one, but it works really well. It's very exciting and fun, and I wouldn't mind listening to this on loop over and over again as I'm trying to avoid death.
Well, that's good, because I think that was absolutely the intention. Well, I'm so excited because looking at our playlist here, I see we have another entry from one of our favorite composers, Yosuke Yasui.
I have to set both of these up. So this is a 1-2 punch. I couldn't decide between these next 2 tracks for track of the week. So I'm going to have both of us decide after we play both of them. Okay, Will, does that sound like a plan?
That sounds fair.
So the first contender...
Wouldn't it be fun if we could do a rock, paper, scissors for the video episode?
Oh, man. Let's just save that for show and tell, because it's already heated, controversial battles.
We definitely have to do another one of these videos for show and tell, because I don't know that I'm going to be able to fly back for them anymore.
Yeah, we'll have to figure that out. Okay, so the first contender, it's another Yosuke Yasui composition, and it's from an Xbox 360 game called Ginga Force. This track is so good. It's the boss theme. It's called Bust a Move Boss. One of the possible track of the week options. Let's take a listen. Oh, Yasui-san loves his modulations. Yeah, Will already called it, guys. You listening to this week's track of the week. There's nothing that can top this. This is Bust a Move Boss. I can't believe this is a boss theme. From Ginga Force. Once again composed by Yosuke Yasui for the 360. It's so flippin' good. I mean, this melody is so catchy. This song is very bold, very daring, not a typical progression at all. It's kind of a dark progression. I mean, it's very fitting for a boss. It doesn't have to be this catchy and groovy, but it happens to be, and that's why I love it so much. It's just a banger. Whew.
The other thing that I love, it's this progression of kind of third relation-y minor chords, which in a different context would have a very Darth Vader kind of vibe, yet they're minor 7th chords, so they're like a little bit less threatening.
The blow, right?
They're a little bit cool and groovy and dancey and fun, but yeah, amazing harmonies, wonderful production. I mean, the second this thing starts, I'm on board and I want to have a dance party.
Yeah, I mean, this is perfect.
Wow.
Here, another reason why it's track of the week, in addition to how much we just love it as a piece of music, perfect shoot 'em up music. It's endless. It does not break for a second. It's a barrage of joy. It's a barrage of groove and dance. Everything is happening. Like if I looked at the waveform of this, I'm sure it's mastered really loud too, but it'd just be a block. Because it's just constant energy, and that's what you need for these kinds of games.
It's
no
pun intended.
Crank open a Mountain Dew
pure life force. It's pure life force.
Pure Ginga Force. Ginga Life Force.
It's so strong.
That's amazing.
God, I love this piece of music.
And I love this gentleman.
I think this might be the greatest thing he's ever composed. I just think it's so
up there.
strong. It's
I would
such
say
a dazzling
it might be tied
arrangement.
with Bless You Boy, which obviously I love a lot. also that Megalomania, I just have a soft spot for that track. That's amazing.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, I love both of those too, but I don't think I was actually, I either wasn't familiar with this or I haven't listened to it out of context of his other compositions, where once you listen to a bunch of Yasui-san's music, you kind of almost become numb to how amazing it is. You're like, well, yeah, of course he can do something amazing.
No offense, going from Superstar Soldier, which it's a great track, but it's just so textbook, going from that to it's just like, what just happened? Like your eyes just opened and you're in this other plane. No pun
also,
intended.
like over a decade,
that helps.
Transpired between the two technology-wise. So.
A little bit. Okay, so let's move on to another classic track, and this is an absolutely textbook shoot 'em up, arcade shoot 'em up track in the best way possible. This was a track very kind of near and dear to our hearts, and it was very important and influential actually for us when we were working on Soaring Through the Stars. This is one of, at least for me, this is one of the tracks I went back to a lot while working on that project. And so I think this is just classic shoot 'em up music here. It's Battle Garega, composed by Manabu Namiki again, coming back today. Let's take a listen to Fly to the Leaden Sky, Stage 1. God, just a taste, guys. This is Fly to the Leaden Sky, Stage 1 from Battle Garega by Manabu Namiki, an absolute master. And it's really special to hear, in my estimation, a very influential piece to someone like Yasuke Yasui. I mean, this has got to be something that he thought about when he was working on his shoot-'em-up games. But, oh my God, it's just so twinkly and groovy, and that bass line is just... It will never cease to make me dance and smile like a fool. It's just so funky, almost funkier than it should be. It's kind of distracting how funky it is. But I just love all the colors in this track. I love all the twinkles and the hard panning, and the melody is very soloistic. It's not a particular catchy melody, but the groove is undeniable on this one.
And it's great. I mean, it kind of reminds me, especially of what we were going for with that Soaring Through the Stars.
Yeah, there's a soloistic nature, isn't there?
Album. Yeah, there is something sort of improvisatory but really satisfying about the melody here. And I love the production. I love all the instrument variety. It's really cool. It also reminds me of a Fallen Brothers track, just for how busy and intricate everything is, and how amazing and how much human personality is injected into this technology. I noticed
here. One thing instrument-wise, there's this kind of really hard metallic sync lead that I don't know if you noticed, but Yasui actually uses that same instrument a lot in his tracks. It sounds kind of like an FM type instrument. I didn't mention, but that is an arcade score that we just played.
Well, the other thing, I think it's fair to say like that can be the old school track of the week, and the Ginga Force is maybe like the new school track of the week.
I love that. That's perfect. Okay, now, this is hilarious. We're going to go to something so different. I did give a shout out to the series that we focused recently on, Twinbee, which is a series of cute-em-up games. It's kind of like a shoot-em-up, but it's just cuter, I guess. We're going to have some other kind of representation from that sub-genre. This is Super Fantasy Zone, which I always forget is a cute-em-up game. Broadly speaking, it's some type of a shoot-em-up. I always forget that. It's just unlike anything else.
It seems like it would be a puzzle game like Jewel Master or something.
Exactly. This is such a cute score. Let's play one of the Latin pieces that we love. It's Mango, composed by Naoki Kodaka. That's one of my favorite Sega Genesis tracks of all time. You guys are listening to Mango from Super Fantasy Zone, composed by Naoki Kodaka, and it was so delightful that he got the opportunity to work on this game because it's not the typical sound or style that we think of for this composer. A lot of the games he was tasked with before this game had, really required a very different musical style, and so it seems to me, listening to this, that he really had a fun time stretching out with this. Making it fit in the Fantasy Zone series, but some of his original music, some of my favorite stuff in the series, it's not something you get on the Genesis all that much. I mean, there's a couple of other instances of this. This does kind of remind me a little bit of maybe something like the Data Select from Sonic 3. There's a couple of really fun kind of Latin pop moments we get on the Genesis, but almost nothing is as good as Mango.
Yeah,
very Sonic-y.
It is very Sonic-y. It sounds like something that could be in a special stage, and it's great. I love any kind of genre-specific flair on the Genesis, just because it just ends up being so cute, because the Genesis has such a specific... The FM sound really is limited in terms of what it's able to express emotionally. So I just love hearing it go for something so earnest, whether it's a samba or an orchestral thing or a bossa nova or just any kind of thing that's like taking it out of its sort of stock comfort zone. I really love hearing, because it adds like a sort of charming innocence to it in a way that it wouldn't if it were realized with actual instruments, because it would just, you'd almost take it for granted. It would, sounds the way it's supposed to, but there's something cute about hearing your little computer try to...
And also, I couldn't resist this. I knew that I wanted to kind of take a pause with the Twin Beast stuff since we had that whole episode, but I was like, if there's an opportunity to play a Super Fantasy Zone track, just know, guys, I'm never not going to take that chance. I mean, this episode, in a lot of ways, was kind of an excuse to put together an outstanding, like an embarrassingly outstanding playlist of video game music. I mean, it's just so good. So many of them are classics that we've played before, but if there's an excuse to put them all together and have a different lens,
Carl,
I'm going to take it.
I had a really random idea, but I'd love to hear that particular track covered by Christoph Herral from the Rayman Legends and Origins series. I could just imagine that quirky and eclectic blend of instruments and sounds that those soundtracks have. This particular melody actually reminds me of something from those games.
Well, you know what that makes me think of, which is a little bit less random than your thought, is that I would love to hear a collaboration by Naoki Kodaka and Christoph Herral. That would be an absolute treat. Maybe we could...
Why is that less random? That seems equally as random.
Well, you already brought up Christoph Herral, and we were talking about
So you're just running
Kodaka.
with my train, but still going to throw me under the bus.
Not random at all, yeah. Man, that is such a fun piece of music. Well, let's go back to something classic. And, I actually may have lied earlier. This might be the only instance where there's more than one track from a series. But I didn't quite realize that, because we did play something from Salamander, which I don't know if it's officially part of the Gradius series. If it is, okay, we are playing something from Gradius 2. It felt wrong to not play something from an actual Gradius game. So we're going to do that. Another Konami track. This is Burning Heat, which is stage 1 from Gradius 2. Let's play something from the NES. I don't think we've had an NES track today, so we have to do that. This is Burning Heat from Gradius 2. He only needs 24 seconds. Doesn't need anything else than that. Burning Heat, Gradius 2 for the NES. The composers, we have Hidenori Meizawa and Yuki Morimoto. Will, this track is so nostalgic to me. It brings me back not only to the early days of the podcast, but playing video games as a kid. This might not have been one of the games that we played, but it captures that era. I want you to take us back, Will. Put yourself in the shoes of when you started to really get into NES, collecting, playing these games, loving these scores. What was it about a score in a game such as Gradius 2 that made you fall in love back in that time?
Well, I think it was the unabashed sense of fun that everything on the original Nintendo had. That, along with imagination. It's like every game was inventing its own genre. And there was this sense of innocence. You know, a sports game wasn't, you know, Madden 93, or it wasn't, you know, the 17th in an installment. It would just be called golf. And it's just like the idea that it was just such an open terrain, and there's like, I don't know, that's so exciting to me. And the fact that everything is colorful and it looks like a toy, and the imagination of the music, like just the whole time you're playing an NES game, at least for me, it's like, I can't believe this is even happening. I put this weird little plastic thing inside another plastic box,
and you
hook
just
up
get
some
joy.
cables, and now, there's this remarkable, cute thing coming out of my television. Beautiful sounds, beautiful.
This sounds like an ad for an NES back in 1985, but
I don't know.
Agree.
I love the imagination, and I love that feeling of it. It's to me, it's the same charm as like playing a vinyl record, where it's like, I can't believe that there's no digital, there's no ones and zeros happen. Like, we're just looking at a disc spinning on a table, going through a needle, and it's making music. I feel the same way when I play, you know, retro consoles.
Yeah, I totally agree. There is so much about this track that is fun and imaginative and exciting. When you listen to this piece of music, it feels vast and open. You can see the sky, and you can just imagine how incredible it would feel to be going through the sky in a jet, you know?
And we've talked about this before with the Gradius series, but what Miki Higashino did with Life Force, that was, I think, replicated by so many composers, the idea of these really iconic melodic riffs, you know, that it's just really memorable, and it captures
series.
This beautiful sense of soaring and flight. And you have these great chord progressions with the flat 6, flat 7 chord, and then also I really like in that sort of secondary development section, you get one of my favorite sort of chord constructions. It's basically like a dominant 7th chord with the 7th in the bass. If you were to picture like C over B flat, or B flat over A flat, I really like that sound. It's very filmic.
You know, something else,
a little bit like John Williams or something, but it has a very 80s sound to me as well. It makes me think of like the moon from DuckTales and stuff like that.
There's one more thing I wanted to shout out about this track, Burning Heat, that I love. In the B section, I guess I would call it, the bass rhythm is which basically,
another shuffle.
If you think of, what's cool about it though is if you think of like groups of 2 eighth notes, duke, 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 in overall like shuffle context, duke, 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 duke. There's something so funky and groovy about that.
Definitely.
And it's one of the things that makes this Burning Heat track.
Yeah, it's like, it's a really rich polyrhythm that's happening in the middle of this groove. It's kind of having that 2 against 3. That's such a cool thing. And I love composers, because that wasn't necessarily an easy thing to do on the NES. In fact, most pieces of music tend to either decide if it's a duplet groove or a triplet groove. That means if it's duplet, you're going to get, you know, quarters, eighths, 16th notes. Yeah. And if it's a triplet groove, every eighth note subdivision will be a triplet. Even that kind of language exists to this day with trackers, that it's actually a little bit harder to have duplets against triplets without doing specific sort of delay commands and everything. So the fact is, it's like that polyrhythm and that
you have to have a smaller
groove
grid,
and exciting. Yeah, it means that composers had to really want to create that. It didn't just happen by accident.
It was so intentional, yeah. And part of that is trying to, I guess, translate original arcade music to the NES, when they did a fantastic job with this score. Let's now move on back to, I guess, the slight future, all the way to the Dreamcast, which now to us is so much in the past.
Distant past.
This is a wonderful composer, Yasuhisa Watanabe. And this is a game called Border Down, which came out for the Dreamcast. And I love this score. He's a great jazz fusion composer. Let's see what he's got to say. This is Bye Bye Mars, Stage 3G. Lovely piece. This is Bye Bye Mars, Stage 3G, just a taste. It's quite a bit longer than this. This is from Border Down, composed by a composer I love, Yasuhisa Watanabe. And again, this is for the Dreamcast. And I picked this track because it's one of the Watanabe tracks that is the most video gamey. I love his jazz fusion music, and a lot of it he really stretches out and goes to places you wouldn't expect to hear for VGM. But this track, I think, is a wonderful balance because there's some of these moments in the melody that remind me of other video game music. We mentioned the Sonic series, but there's actually some Sonic moments in the melody later on in the melody in this track. And then you guys are hearing now at a real live trumpet solo. How fun is that?
Not an imitation trumpet solo. This
Not
is
a synth
the real,
trumpet.
actual, organic, freshly raised, non-GMO. No, this is a great piece of music. I love the chord progression. I love all the surprising. I mean, how fusiony. My instant thought when we started playing this was, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Because this is a piece of music that it feels very much of its time, but very much not of its time. In that, I think it definitely can sit on the shelf alongside all of this other shoot 'em up music. Not to say that every piece of music on today's playlist is of the same genre or style, but there's definitely a lot more similarities, I'd say, than there are differences. Even going from an NES track to this one. I mean, I'm just hearing certain things about the groove and hearing certain things about the chord progression and certain melodic elements here that I'm like, this could be in a modern Gradius game, or this could be, or I could imagine that, Hidenori Miyazawa track done up in this exact production style. And I think that's sort of something that I was struck with, that it's like the consistent thing with all of these tracks is just the quality and innovation, and there is something about none of them are super fast-paced and blistering, yet so many of them seem to have a performative quality. Now that word, it tends to have negative connotations, but I mean performative in the sense that there's something improvisatory, or it sounds like a solo or a riff.
It's very flowing, very free. And Will, you bring up a good point that, at least on this playlist, you're right. There's not a lot of absolutely shredding, blistering tempo tracks. They are out there, and I listened to some of them. After we play this next track, I'm going to give a little shout out of some of the series and games, I guess, that narrowly didn't make the cut today, because there's some great stuff. But let's move on, shall we? We're going to go to a series that you got to feature if you're doing a shoot 'em up episode. This is the Touhou series by really a one-man team. Zun does, I think, almost everything with these games. He makes the games, he does the music. Very talented person. This is Junya Ota is Zun's real name. We're going to play something from Touhou Kakidan Mystic Square. And this came out for the PC 98. Let's take a listen to kind of a weird title, but it's a great track, Romantic Children. There you go. Just a taste of Romantic Children, kind of an unfortunate title, from Touhou Kaikidan Mystic Square, composed by Zun, real name Junya Ota. This came out for the PC 98, if you can't tell by these sounds. And I have a few Touhou scores. This happens to be my favorite track from the series that I've heard personally. At some point, it would be fun to focus on this series. The problem is we would need to find, I don't know if they're out there, arranged versions, because I know right now, Will, you're going to get sick of that episode, because if it's nothing but PC 98 sounds, I could just see Will kind of, this happens sometimes, where like the second half of the episode, you're just like, I need some variety.
Yeah, I do get a little bored when it's the same kind of thing over and over again. But something that I think we all find very charming about PC-88, PC-98 music, and particularly just a lot of the composers that worked on those platforms, which is, I guess, to put it crudely, from my perspective, you get the kind of writing that you got on the NES, but with the sounds of the Genesis.
It's a good way to describe it.
These sort of like catchy 80s power ballad kind
Very
of
poppy.
melodies and harmonies, yet
a little more fleshed out
with these FM sounds that make us think of
great sound.
Sonic the Hedgehog or something like that.
I'm an endless fan of PC-98, 88 music. I'm going to give some shout-outs to some outstanding tracks that didn't quite make our playlist. I really liked Bloodstained Lake from Elemental Master, which is a shoot 'em up for the Genesis. Boss from DoDonPachi, I guess the first, was really good. Ruined Green from Thunder Force 6, the Thunder Force series. Very sad, didn't quite make the episode today. I liked Hinder 1 from Darius Burst. And last but not least, I liked Chapter 1 from Civalian, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, that is a Super Nintendo shooter. So a lot of great stuff we couldn't include today. Let's move on. We have a few left. This one was a really cool hidden gem. I had never heard this track before. It doesn't sound like shoot 'em up music, but I really, really like it. This is from Super R-Type for the Super Nintendo. And I have heard some of the tracks from that score before, but for whatever reason, I never listened to this one. And it's so funky. This is As Wet as a Fish. And let's get the composers here. Three of them. We have Yasuhiro Kawakami, Tokushi Hiyamuto, and Hiroshi Kimura. Let's take a listen to As Wet as a Fish. You guys are listening to just a taste of As Wet as a Fish from Super R-Type. This is for the Super Nintendo.
Thinking something that I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but I won't
just
say it.
Just think it, and you guys can think along with Will. This is led by Yasuhiro Kawakami, some other talented composers as well. And yeah, I slept on this track. I don't know, I've definitely heard Super R-Type before. I think I've even played this on ZSNES back in the day, and so I'm sure I've heard some of the score, but this one, I don't know what's going on in the context of this, if this is some sort of cutscene or something. I can't imagine this is active shoot 'em up music. It's too slow and funky.
Cute little bluesy piano solo.
Isn't it
the Super
adorable?
Nintendo is really adorable.
This is a track that there's more than meets the eye. It kind of takes its time, but some of those later sections, there's a lot of really quality and interesting musical things happening. I'm a big fan of this track.
Yeah, me too. It's great, but it's also charming. There's something like, I don't know, in the same way the Genesis is cute doing something innocent, the Super Nintendo is cute
doing something funky,
cool.
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know, it's like if this were a Genesis track, it wouldn't be cute at all. It would just be kind of cool.
That is a really interesting
Super Nintendo
point.
doing orchestral, you take it more seriously. But
yeah, we don't hear this kind of music
about
as much.
That. I think part of it, we also have so many connotations. Like the Genesis marketing was always about, how cool and hip and everything it is, and how the Super Nintendo was lame and a baby's toy.
I think SNES was just about being fun.
Yeah,
they definitely didn't worry as much about being cool. That's for sure. But I mean, Kawakami, he definitely brought some cool hip factor to this.
I love
at least
that
this
melody.
track.
Yada yada.
Yeah, isn't that like a little bit melancholy and just
very
beautiful?
much?
Yeah,
I mean,
really cool.
I feel like there's a limit to. I really want to explore what makes, because to me, I hear that and I'm like, that's such a Japanese sounding melody. But what about it is it? Because it's not something that necessarily draws its origins from Japanese folk music, but it just, there's so many Japanese film composers, video game composers that I feel like would use a gesture like that in a melodic phrase, and I'm so drawn to it. I find it so incredibly beautiful.
Well, it's that
I
kind
can't
of
quite explain it.
Melancholia thing that Marty touched on in one of our panels that is so prevalent in so much Japanese media music. And there is this sense of, this track is a great example. This happens so much in video games. The melody is a little bit sad. And if you were to play it slowly on the piano, you might bring a tear to someone's eye. But when it's on top of, I mean, it's just such a fun combination. That's very specific to video games. Okay, let's move on to something so fun. And what a treat this is. This playlist is the gift that keeps on giving, because we have yet another Yosuke Yasui composition, and it is from Mamoru-kun Curse. I also had to remind myself that that is a shoot-'em-up game. It's an arcade shoot-'em-up game. I thought it would be fun to play a different track other than Bless You Boy. It's been featured a lot on the podcast. Everybody knows it. Everybody loves it. Maybe not everybody, but everybody should. We're going to play another track, maybe my second favorite from Mamoru-kun Curse. This would be one I would love to, at some point, try to learn. Arcade score here by Yasui. Let's take a listen to Yokai Disco. Whew, man, that is a killer piece of music. You guys are listening to Yokai Disco. Check out this whole score if you haven't. Mamoru-kun Curse. The English title is Mamoru Has Been Cursed. We play a track called Bless You Boy from this score, and I would love to learn this track one day because I absolutely love it. Yeah, Yasui's music is just so unique, but also so comfortable. It just feels like you've kind of always known it, in the way that he adds these really spicy jazz fusion, surprising chords. He makes it feel so effortless and natural. It's really inspirational. I am so excited that we're able to include so much of his music today.
Well, his music reminds me a lot of that chiptuner we were talking about a couple weeks ago, Naruto. Which is that it's the blending of a really just audaciously exciting, energetic, rhythmic sensibility and harmonic, just really fast pace, satisfying and delicious chord changes, but there's always a really strong melody that feels central to the core
and also, I don't know,
of the piece.
Will, I don't know if you would agree, but not only is there a strong melody, but there's this kind of pure, almost innocent, folk-like quality to a lot of his melodies.
Right.
Very
it's a video
sweet.
game melody.
It's a sweet melody, but around it is the most busy, funky, sometimes kind of ominous rhythm section and
there are
colors
those
around
people that I think are able to do that. Jake Kaufman is another person where his music always has that duality to it. It's like, for how awesomely it's produced or how groovy or funky it is, there's always something catchy in the melody, and that is what puts to mind the classic VGM that I think is so often an influence. What I think is so cool about artists like this is, in terms of the overall package, they actually are able to transcend their influences. I think it reminds me a lot of, it's like, you know, people talk about the Beatles or rock bands having influence and stuff, but the Beatles to me are the first rock group that actually transcended their influences, and that the music they were writing and creating themselves sounded better than the people that influenced them. And I feel in some ways you could say that about Yosuke Yasui, in that it's like melodically, or Jake Kaufman, melodically they're able to tap into things that composers like Manami Matsumae were doing back in the 80s and 90s. Yet in terms of the arrangement, they're able to do things that only the top tier kind of elite programmers were able to ever kind of explore. And the combination of all of that in one thing
it's
just
so
makes
exciting.
that kind of music so exciting.
So delightful. Okay, guys, we have one more track before our play out, and definitely stick around for that play out because I did mention before that it is another Namiki track you're not going to want to miss. But before that, let's do something really interesting. This is actually a PS1 game, has a German title, Einhander, or there is an umlaut, so it might be Einhander. And yeah, I don't really know much about this game. Anyone who does, let me know. I know that I love this track, though. It's called Earthlight, and it's composed by Kenichiro Fukui. And it's a really relaxing, beautiful track that is not what I would expect shoot-'em-up music to sound like. It's really cool. Let's take a listen to Earthlight from Einhander. This is a killer piece of music. It's so groovy and relaxing. It's Earthlight from Einhander, which is a PS1 shoot-'em-up. I don't really know much else other than that. It's composed by Kenichiro Fukui, and it's so good. I think I heard a cover of this. It might have been in the Dwelling of Duels community fairly recently, but oh man, this is I would say a hidden gem. When that groove came in with that kind of cheesy 80s Toto meets 90s Hans Zimmer sound, God, it's just so groovy, and yeah, it's cheesy, but it just feels so good. I thought this was a fun
True
show way to end the
Romance or Rain Man, or like an early just door game. I know our dad loves the score to True Romance. He's like, I think that music is so good.
It's actually really unfitting.
Yeah, it's really lame and awkwardly happy.
This track, man, I don't know. I closed my eyes and I turned it up and I was listening to it on my Sennheiser headphones, and I was just transported, to another planet. It's so
really good. It's so
vibey.
Groovy. I love the chords. Vibey is perfect. And you have to embrace the cheesiness. I mean, it's like we love elevator music. We love old production music.
I wouldn't change anything about this track.
Yeah, I mean, just because something is corny, you need to get past that, because oftentimes music that we perceive as being cheesy is actually music that's being executed at a really high level. Yeah. It's just, I think, almost indulging so much in these kind of saccharine cliches.
Well, the last thing I'll say about this track is I feel bad I only discovered it recently, because this would have been on our PS1 Greatest Hits episode, because this is one of my favorite PS1 tracks, I'll be honest. So, Will, to kind of sum things up, how would you describe, maybe based on this playlist or everything you know about shoot-'em-ups, how would you describe the sound of shoot-'em-ups when it comes to the tradition that all these different series have coming together in this episode?
Well, I think if I were to try to distill the essence of shoot-'em-ups into a piece of music, I mean, in a sense, that's what I tried to do with Superstar Squadron.
So just listen to that, guys.
But the thing is quite truthfully, there really isn't one thing that every one of these pieces of music has in common. There are definitely commonalities, and I think there's a lot of things you could talk about. The fact that so many of them are kind of rock, shuffle, triplet, the kind of melodic figuration we were talking about in the Salamander,
I would
Gradius
say
kind of thing. But in general, I think shoot 'em ups are interesting, and I think it does have to do with that tempo consideration. The fact that the action on the screen, for the most part, involves a very slowly panning screen, and all the action more or less is stationary movement within that scrolling. I do think it allows composers freedom to not necessarily have to be as frantic as the action on screen, in that
we definitely saw that today.
Yeah, we hear music like this that's really chill, and we hear music that's a little bit more
some
frenetic.
Of the tracks on this playlist that, if you were looking at the actual gameplay, you would be surprised based on how relaxing at times the music is. I love that about these shoot 'em up scores. Very jazzy, a lot of funky grooviness on today's episode. We had an absolute blast sharing this. It was so fun to do this video episode. If you guys enjoy it, let us know once in a while. We're going to try to do this. And so, yeah, if you're listening to this just on our feed, you can head on over to our YouTube channel and check out this, as well as some other videos that we have on there. Try to be a little more active on YouTube as well. That's going to be something I'm going to try to do in the next few months here, because it's been
really
a while since we've uploaded
playing music together live.
I know, me too.
Let's
try to do something, some sort of quarantine-y fall project like that. Would be really cool. Try to put up some fun YouTube videos.
Let's do it in August,
think about
because once school starts, I think I'm going to be pretty busy. But.
Okay, guys, we're going to play you out with a really cool track from Death Smiles. It's called Burning Halloween Town, composed by Manabu Namiki. It's so good. This game came out for the arcade and the Xbox 360. That's about it. Anything else you got at the end, Will?
I think that's it. I just hope everyone's staying safe and that you're all in good spirits and healthy.
Thank you so much for tuning in, listening, watching us. We really appreciate it. We love you guys. Thanks for all the wonderful tweets and comments and emails. We read everything. Sometimes we forget to respond. Apologies, but we really appreciate everybody in this community. And one last shout out, definitely check out An Evening at the Roost, the Kelly Brothers' new podcast on the Marcato Bros Network. It is a really perfect combination, if you think about the vibe and the tone of our show, the vibe and the tone of that show, just really something special. We love the Kellys so much. We love the tone of their podcasts, very conversational and relaxed and happy.
If anyone's had the pleasure
friendly.
to get to spend time with them, they also have this disarming quality of you're talking to them and you don't realize hours have passed.
They're
interviewing
you. Yeah, it's wonderful.
They're lovely folks. So yeah, you can go to marcatonet.com to check out all the shows on our network, _Heroes3, Evening at the Roost, as well as this show. But yeah, props to them, and can't wait to see what they come up with next.
All right, guys, enjoy this Burning Halloween Town. That's it. My name is Karl Brueggemann.
And I'm Will Brueggemann. Have a great week, everybody.
Peace out.
Bye-bye.